Well, you didn't think we were all just going to go away, did you? We are back on this Sunday night, the 4th of February, as the clock goes tick, 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 tick. But we have to live all through that time, so who knows what lurks ahead in the weather world? We have the weekend, the week ahead outlook. And the long, we'll look at the long range. Big storm going on in California right now. Flash flood warnings up for Los Angeles, among so many other watches and warnings there. And finally, the gloom and doom has gone away as we are in the sweet spot of a block. All of this to be discussed in great detail and a couple of special announcements too on tonight's Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. Brought to you by Tempest by Weatherflow. Get the revolutionary Tempest weather system. Join the fastest growing observing weather network on the planet. The link is on the descriptor to this podcast. And if you do decide to make a purchase of this or anything else on the Tempest website, use the coupon code WINTER2324. And if you do, you'll get
A big 10% off. Amazing. Yes,
it is amazing. So Mr. Rayo has the floor.
I do.
Oh, yes, you do. You go first tonight. You talk.
Okay, well, we have a quiet weather pattern coming up.
No, 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 no. We have things to tell. We have announcements to make.
Oh, okay. Well, I wasn't really allowed to say anything until the actual event took place.
Well,
But
I did get the message, though.
yes, well,
The time has come.
the time has come. It came, and Renata and I are now with a new title, grandparents. I can't believe it. Finally, you and so many of my other friends went through all of this, in some cases, quite a few years ago. And I said to myself, yeah, I'm wondering if I'm ever going to have the privilege and pleasure. But I finally have. My grandson arrived on Friday morning, Groundhog Day, and Julian Joseph Rayo, or maybe we might call him JJ, not
Well,
to be confused with
I
Joe.
was thinking about that, by the way. But once again, as I have often said, and you agree with me, is the fact that you and I are attached at the hip, and when I did never, I don't think I ever even asked you what games they were considering, and there's certainly no way they knew, but it just so happens that Julian is my oldest grandson's name. So there you go.
That seems to
And
be a very popular name. I think among the top 40 baby names, Julian is on that list. So it may not have been considered years ago, but it is becoming seemingly increasingly popular now in this generation.
yes, Julian is the new Michael.
It looks like it.
It
It
is.
looks like it.
So, it's this is, this is where it really is great because
It's not by the way, William Hubert's not a she. It's a he. It's not Juliet. It's Julienne. So
right. And
after
not
the
the
after the
and not
obsolete after the obsolete calendar, the
right.
Juliet.
And not the style of potatoes.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So we have that and it's
It's really
wonderful.
weird. It's weird to. We finally saw him. We went to the hospital yesterday, and was able to hold him. He was only 30 hours old, and my God, Joe! I mean, they're so small.
Oh, I know. They really you
And
forget. You forget when yours were that small.
yes, exactly.
You
And
know, and my oldest grandson, I remember leaving for I had to go. My daughter uh, had Julian. This was when she was living in Jersey City, and I was working at Vios, and she went into labor uh, right after. I mean, perfectly timed. My kids know about about time and everything, but I got a call at 6:30 right after I was done, pretty much with everything, and uh, anyway, she called me, and I went into the newsroom and I said, my daughter's is having her baby. I'm leaving to go to the hospital. And I forgot who covered for me.
Addison. It was Addison.
Addison
I
stayed and
was I was off that night.
right.
I was not there, and Addison, who normally would have left at like 4 or 5 o'clock, he was still there for whatever reason and stayed a few extra hours. I hope he was compensated.
Well, I'll tell you this. I'll tell you this. Now, I had told I had told John Houseman, the executive producer, that this could happen at any time. So, and he knew he was totally okay with it. Um, but so when I went into the newsroom to tell him that I was leaving, um, I got a I got a look from another executive there who wasn't sure whether I should be able to leave or not. And I just said, "I'm going. Bye." And I left. I
Right.
mean, that's it's just one of those interesting things that happens along the
Was
way,
this the same? Was
and
this
you
the
just and
same?
you just and you
Was this the
just
same
shakes your head.
executive? I'm not mentioning the name, obviously, but was this the same executive who, when a good friend of ours had lost his wife, and I proposed that I cover your shift, half of your shift, and you cover half of mine, that this person said, no, absolutely not. Uh, that will not fly.
Um, it might be.
Yeah. All right.
I might be. I gotta think it. I gotta think it. Gotta think it through. All right. So there's that. Uh, so while before that even started on uh, after Tuesday night's show was done, I was kind of feeling a little off. And sure enough, um, when I woke up Wednesday morning, I had a fever and uh, I was stuffed up like I had a cold. And I took a COVID test, and the COVID test was positive, which I got because I know exactly where I got it. That was when I was on my birthday. I had my granddaughter's 1 year old birthday party with, I don't know, 15 screaming kids and another 15 screaming adults in a house on a rainy day, so nobody could go outside. We're all confined. So I had to pick it up from somebody that must have had it there. So there was that. But fortunately for me, because this is the second time I've had it, the both times it went through me really, really quick. I mean, this is like my fifth. This is day 5, and I would say I'm about 95%. I'm still just a little bit congested, but other than that, all good. My appetite though is also a little off too. I didn't feel like eating as much as I usually like to eat. So uh, that is recovered, and also to give everybody a heads up, and I pinned it up on the top of the chat board, that on Wednesday we are going to have a very special guest here on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. Um, uh, I'm just going to make a joke out of it, but I'm not going to. Lee Goldberg from WABC television, a meteorologist there, and has been seemingly forever. It's got to be 20 plus years, 25 years,
He's
I would
been there
think.
for quite some time. Yeah.
Yeah. So he will be joining us on Wednesday at 7:35 p.m. So be sure you mark it down and don't miss it. And have some questions ready. So this way we could pass them along to Lee, and sure he will be very, very good about answering them. So we're really very excited about having Lee as a guest on our wonderful podcast, which is on Sunday through Thursdays at 7:35 p.m. and the occasional Friday and Saturday when there is a storm around. Hi to everybody on the chat board. Hi to those of you lurking in the background, which probably Lee lurks. I'm sure he lurks.
It's looking at one of the prerequisites. I know that Lee had told me a couple of weeks ago was let's wait for a quiet spell of weather. Obviously, when the weather's very active, I'm sure at Channel 7 he is very active. But it looks like this week It's going to be very quiet, not much to talk about, at least in this part of the country, thank God. Although out in California, they're battening down for another gigantic atmospheric river event,
It's
which
already there.
which is already there. And in fact, I heard that tonight the Grammy Awards are going to be held. One of the local networks will be televising that in a matter of minutes. And they're saying that in Los Angeles, where the Grammys are being held, that the number of people there may actually be held down because of the tremendous amount of rain and winds that are expected, not just in the next few hours, but over the next 24 hours in and around. They're talking about a rare warning, a hurricane type warning, Joe, because right along the coastal plain, they're expecting in Central California winds maybe gusting upwards to 90 miles per hour. I mean, this
You
is
know,
both absurd for
yeah,
the.
and they also have it just went up not too long ago. They have a flash flood warning up for Los Angeles, for central and west Los Angeles, and surrounding areas, because they've already gotten, a solid 2 to 3 inches of rain, and ground's wet from the rain from a few days ago, and the next round that's coming in is probably going to produce anywhere from 1 to 4 inches on top of that. So things are already floating away in SoCal. But we're going to we'll take a look at some radars and to see what's going on out there. So, gloom and doom. Oh, by the way, if you like the show, hit the like button. We love going over 100 likes, so Joe gets to ring the bell. And uh, gloom and doom is I, I'm 10 day stretch of cloud cover is fairly unusual. Even in the spring in gloom and doom, 10 days is a lot. But this was quite a stretch of of what I always call gloom and doom weather, where it may not always be doing much of anything other than being overcast, but it's that low grade overcast that doesn't go away, and you just kind of, when you're outside in it, you're sort of droopy, and you don't really feel like doing anything. But it's gone, and the one great thing about a block is that if you're in the sweet spot in the block, you're in great shape because nothing's moving. So it looks like the weather's, I think, is going to stay fine at least through Thursday. And I don't know how much, if any, rain we're going to see through the week, through next weekend.
I'm looking at Christopedia commenting about the fact that PE&G is the electric company, I guess, out in California, and they tend to shut off the power ahead of the storm because their grid is so bad. It's much worse than PSE&G here in our part of the country. Can you imagine just like you're watching TV and they say we're turning off your power in about an hour because of this impending storm? It's
They,
crazy.
since the wildfires from a few years ago, they've done a lot to improve the grid. It's not even it's not so much the grid as the fact that they have a lot of their power lines are above ground. And that's a big problem in California, particularly in the areas with the wildfires. And they have managed to improve it. So we'll see how that goes. Uh, you know, uh, they got through with the Texas cold blast a couple of weeks ago without much of an impact on the power grid on that one. So Texas was able to make whatever things modifications they needed to make to handle it. So let's hope the same is the case for the state of California. But we've got no issues here uh, through the week. Looks like the first half will be a bit on the chilly side, but closer to average, or maybe a little bit above or a little bit below, if you want, quibble a degree here and there. And then it'll probably, I think, warm up. Probably should get into the 50s on Friday by Friday.
It does look like we're going to have a nice warm up by the end of the upcoming week and into next weekend, Super Bowl weekend next weekend. And we've been so accustomed in past years to warn everybody about the potential for a significant winter storm either by or soon after the Super Bowl. But this year, it looks like it's going to be mild, and if we get any kind of unsettled weather, it looks like it's going to be in the form of rain, not snow.
Well, there's some debate as far as the pattern change goes, and the pattern is change is cha- is cha- actually uh, we've already changed. We've had three different patterns in the last 4 weeks. This is the third one that we're in, which is this omega block that developed, and the omega block signature is a signature that you often see in the warmer times of the year and not in the winter time. So this was pretty unusual. But this block is going to go away, and I think what we need, is yes, there's not much weather going on here locally this week, but it's going to be, I think, important to pay a close attention to how this block breaks down and what ensues afterward, because I think that may set the table for what we evolve into for next pattern wise next week and beyond. I remain guarded about. I know there's a lot of people that are throwing around all sorts of, you know, certainty predictions out there with regards to, what's going to happen after this week. But I'm being really cautious. I'm just I want to see I want to see a lot of different things show up, and I've seen a few things show up and then disappear, and then I've seen other things disappear and then reappear. So let's watch this play out this week. It'll be very important in terms of where where we're going to wind up when this is all said and done. Scott Briller bangs the tip jar. Thank you, Scott, for hitting super chat. Mother Briller had successful hip surgery. Great to hear. Recovering in the local rehab, and yes, our thoughts and prayers all going toward you and toward Mother Briller. We need her well. Okay, so pass along the good thoughts, and let's segue over to the watches and warnings map, which is busy in the west. Not so much in the east. Pretty quiet in the east. We've had some gusty winds here from the northeast. Sort of a bit of a wedge with the way the high is building in, and this weird looking low that stretched out from Arkansas to off the east coast of Florida. They had severe weather this morning in South Florida. Wind advisories are up for much of Georgia, South Carolina, and eastern Alabama. But out west is where it's all going on, Joe. Winter storm warnings. Las Vegas is not in a winter storm warning, but just to the northwest of Las Vegas, they are in winter storm warnings, as is much of Nevada except the northern counties, which are some are under advisories. But we've got winter storm warnings in the Sierra Nevadas in California. We've got also winter storm warnings in the San Bernardino Mountains in California, and you can see the red, this little blotches of red there. Those are all flash flood warnings that are up right now in and around LA. And the purple that's offshore, those are marine storm warnings that are in effect. And here's LA, the LA Weather Service office forecast map, and the purple areas there all in storm warnings. And oh, there's even an avalanche warning somewhere. But you got high wind warnings. I was looking at some of the mountain forecasts where they have winter storm warnings, talking about uh, snow of a couple of feet and winds gusting to 90 miles an hour. I can't even fathom what that's like. I can't. I've been in snow with 40 to 50, and maybe even you could say 50 to 60, but the snow and 90-mile an hour winds, I can't really fathom.
The great late humorist Gene Shepard, in one of his books, I think it was Ferrari in the Bedroom, I might be mistaken, wrote a story about somebody who was trying to escape a blizzard over the northern plain states, and he referred to it as a real old fashioned Wyoming screamer. And I guess if you're going to have snow, heavy snow, and 90-mile-an-hour winds, if that's not a screamer, I don't know what is.
Yeah. I've got the surface map put up here for California. I just want to put some boundaries so we can kind of see the borders and where everything is. And some of the wind gusts offshore, like at Catalina Island, is gusting to 54, and most of the gusts, there's some 40 and 50 mile an hour gusts on a lot of these offshore islands that we're seeing. Land winds, not so much. Although I see a mountain here with a, what is that? That is Chileo, which is, by the way, 5,450 feet above sea level, 3232. The wind there is 45, gusting to 57. They don't have a precip observation, but I'm assuming that it's doing something there. So if it's 32, I'm guessing it's heavy wet snow that's probably going on at Chileo
And I've
in
got
California.
I've got some wind gusts in California for today, Joe. Palisades, Tahoe, 121 mile per hour. Mammoth Mountain, 99 miles per hour. Grapevine, California, 94 miles per hour. Kirkwood, California, 90 miles per hour. And Funt Ranch. I wonder if Alan Funt from Candid Camera had anything to do with that. Funt Ranch, 88 miles per hour today. Wow.
That's crazy. So this is what it looks like on the surface, because you hear all these, the TV news loves catchy jargon and all the rest of it. They love it almost as much as I abhor it. But what this is, I mean, we have a major storm. It's a 987 low that's sitting west of San Francisco, and this low is occluded out. There's a cold front that extends from the point of occlusion that goes all the way down. I mean, way down into the subtropical Pacific. So I mean, you just got this, this pretty much this jet, this southwest jet running from the Pacific, from the subtropical Pacific, northeastward, right into central and southern California. And a lot of the heavy rain is actually going to be shifting southward during the overnight. So the folks the southernmost California right now, south and east of Los Angeles, it's not really doing very much rain wise. But that's all going to change as that front sweeps eastward and we start to see the rain area begin to shift to the south.
Now we have on the chat board New Brunswick, Canada guy, and I'm wondering if he
Ah,
could. I
that's
wonder if he
another
could.
that's another place that we got to
Now,
go to.
New Brunswick, which is a province in Canada, Atlantic Canada, is not getting this. But from what I've been able to dig up here, um, oh, thank you, dear. The executive producer says ring the bell, and I'm ringing it. We've already got 100 likes. Um, Sydney, Nova Scotia, which is not too far from New Brunswick, but it's to the east. And New Brunswick, as I said, looks like it's out of it. But maybe our friend New Brunswick, Canada guy can verify this. Sydney, Nova Scotia is likely experiencing at this moment its worst blizzard in history. Snow began there Friday evening. Some residents on Cape Breton Island have received upwards to 100 centimeters. That's equivalent to 40 inches of snow already. By Monday evening, some locations could see 120 to 150 centimeters. That would be 48 to 60 centimeters of snow in 72 hours. That's in Nova Scotia, in Sydney, Nova Scotia. And again, that's a powerful offshore system that has been brushing that area, that region, with clouds and heavy snow. And New Brunswick, from what I can see here, New Brunswick is right on the outer fringes of that storm. Maybe they're getting clouds, maybe they're even getting some light snow or flurries.
I got the
But
radar up on the screen.
and yeah, so I mean, the main brunt of this is being felt by the folks who are listening or are in right now in Nova Scotia. Wow.
And I was just looking at this is the radar from Environmental Canada, and the darker green areas. All of this is snow. And based on the radar intensity, if you click on a point here on the radar, I'm clicking near Halifax, for example. They'll give you the radar precipitation rate for that particular point, and they're calling it light visibility, 2/10 of a mile to. I'm sorry, the rate of precip is zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.3 centimeters per hour. So that's light snow. Okay. Uh, Trying to get to some of the darker greens that are up further north, New Glasgow. Um, moderate snow there. The rate there is half a centimeter to three-quarters of a centimeter per hour. And going further north, let's go to the dark green St. Peter's. Um, Moderate there, precipitation rate. Um, Viewing snow. This is a snow rate reflectivity mode. It says three-quarters of a centimeter to 1 centimeter per hour. That they're calling that moderate, a centimeter per hour. I mean, 2.5 centimeters equals an inch. I mean, we usually with moderate snow, that's like an inch an hour, so that would be 2.5 centimeters an hour. So I'm not sure, you know, what what the if the translations are
Maybe
the
they can't
same
tell
or
because
not.
it's maybe I can't tell really because of the blowing snow.
Well, that could be.
Yeah.
Um, Here's Sydney. You mentioned Sydney. Moderate there, three-quarters to 1 centimeter an hour of snowfall at the moment. Trying to get into some of these. Oh, here's one. This is a radar echo that's just to the southeast of Sydney, 1.5 to 1.9 centimeters an hour. So all of these areas here, Sydney, uh, uh, is it? I can't see if that's a C or a G. Cabarrus, Lewisburg, Port Marion, or Morion. Moderate there, 1 to 1.5. So I mean, they have been getting clobbered. New Brunswick is, as you said, is mostly out of it. I'll go down further south. You can see the perspective here. So you got Maine. There's not much of anything going on in New Brunswick. It's all over Nova Scotia. Um, the southern part of Nova Scotia is not doing much of anything. Once you go west of Halifax, it really has tapered off there. But from Halifax eastward and northward, still getting some heavy snow, and also back up to Charlottetown. Yeah, that's still
Charlottetown,
moderate.
Charlottetown is Prince Edward Island.
That's Prince Edward Island. Okay, so they're getting hammered there as well. So uh, I decided this afternoon I was like, let me see if I can get a radar from Canada, and I'm glad you reminded me. And this is the surface map here, and I think this was, that we had that little patch of rain that formed yesterday that sat over New Jersey and offshore. That was one last low on that weather front that moved on through. That was one last low that formed, and then as it moved out and northeastward, it intensified fairly rapidly down to a 982 low. It's all wrapped up here. I mean, you can see the isobars here are fairly tight. So they're blowing away. I could see some 30 knot plus wind barbs both along the coast and in inland areas. So, and Nova Scotia, I don't think, we certainly have not talked very much at all about Nova Scotia with snow this year because it just hasn't been much of anything. So,
Right.
and they didn't get much of anything as I remember last year. So this is the first, this is probably the first big snowstorm for them in 2 years.
Normally when you think of heavy snow in Atlantic Canada, you think more of Newfoundland. Newfoundland is more prone to get these kind of snows. I mean, not to say that Nova Scotia doesn't get them, but they don't get them quite as frequently. But boy, they're really getting hammered with this one particular system. And meanwhile, not too far away to the west in Rhode Island, Adam Lowe on our chat board says nature says spring has sprung here in Rhode Island. The robins have come back this weekend. Geese are flying north, and he's even heard some spring peepers who were peeping. If indeed we get the big flip at mid-month to a more wintry weather pattern, I feel bad for the robins and the geese and the spring peepers
Well,
because
the
they may really
always come back in February. They always come back in
Actually,
February.
I did a report. This is over a decade ago now, at the Mohonk Mountain House, and the naturalist there says, and I find that hard to believe because Joe, I've never seen robins in December, January, or February. I always see them in March or April. But he claims that the robins don't migrate anymore. That
Some don't.
they
Some
actually
don't.
stay. They actually stay in the Hudson Valley year round now. But again, and it's weird because Mohonk is north of me and is obviously colder and tends to be snowier than what I have. But I have never seen in my 22 years up here in Putnam Valley a robin in January or February. But again, you're right. Some birds now they come back in February, or some stick around all year.
Yeah. And actually, also the ones that stick around tend to be the fledglings from the year before. They don't migrate the first year out.
Right,
They usually hang back, and
right.
they migrate the second year out. So you could make the case and say, well, maybe there was a big baby boom of robins in the last couple of years, and those babies are hanging around, and you see them, and then you know they join the migration beat later because they usually come down here. They usually come
And
to down here to North Carolina to Georgia, but I haven't really seen I haven't really seen any here this winter.
And Phone King One on the chat board, answering back Vincent Croce, he says yes, bad snow drought for New York's metro, depressing. Now, I over dinner when we were watching the ABC evening news because all the other networks were showing basketball, golf. Joe, here in New York, Fox 5 was showing bowling this afternoon. I
I
said,
know, I saw that.
I can't even remember seeing bowling. I remember it used to be on Channel 7 in January and February when I was growing up. You always can see a bowling tournament. I said, my God, bowling. But on ABC 7, the evening news tonight, they were talking about the terrible conditions in California with the rain and the flooding and the winds and everything else. And I turned to Renata and I said, it was maybe 2, 3 years ago. All of California, the drought maps had California not just in red, but dark red for severe or exceptional drought. And I remember seeing on all the network newscasts people begging, pleading, saying, "We need the rain. Oh, we need it. It's so bad." And now look what's happening to them. Now they're getting just the opposite. So I tell all of you, like for example, the people like Phone King saying, "Oh, it's a terrible snow drought New York City has. Oh, it's terrible. It's so depressing." I warn you, watch out for what you hope for, because as I've always said for years, Mother Nature always balances the checkbook in her own weird way. And it was 3 years ago at this time in February that we got whacked with something like 12 to 18 inches of snow in the tri-state area. Now, of course, we don't have much of anything. But be careful, because nature could flip on a dime, and before this winter's over, you never know. That big snow that a lot of you were waiting for or hoping for just may come. I know some of you now are saying, "Good, good," like that, but you know,
It all evens out at the end of the day. At some point, it
yeah,
will.
it will.
Uh, Pete
Yeah.
James, thank you for hitting super chat, and he's quoting someone you know quite well, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who said, um, "Ice sheets melting, causing wild weather extremes, typical winters moving forward." Well, I think there's some validity to that. I was reading a couple of articles about the yeah, I didn't realize that the Atlantic Ocean has the salinity level of the Atlantic Ocean is higher than the salinity level of the Pacific, and that impacts the not only the currents in the Atlantic, but there's I forgot now the acronym for it, but it's basically the upwelling that goes on, and there's been discussion about the Gulf Stream collapsing, and then this particular conveyor type current in the in the Atlantic is also there's some ideas that maybe that will also collapse, and that this was kind of broaching the subject that I brought up a few times about whether there's a tipping point
Yeah.
where if if it gets too warm, that you wind up causing something else to happen that reverses all the warming to the other extreme. And this was an argument for another uh, another Europe ice age kind of thing. No danger of that happening anytime soon. It was a very interesting piece, though, that I read. If I can find the link, I will. I'll pass it along, if not today, in coming days. And the other thing we should talk about too is the fact that we've got this sort of weird, because of the way the Omega block is set up, we've got a low. One of the California lows, the low that came in a couple of days ago, has now, the primary low has moved into Arkansas and has died out. The secondary is developing in the northeastern Gulf of Mexico. At least it was. And here it is on the 21Z map. It's actually inland in the southeast corner of Alabama, and there's a warm sector that goes down through South Florida. They had severe weather there earlier today in southern Florida, tornado watches, a lot of tornado warnings that popped up too. I've actually been on the edge of the rain all day. I haven't seen much of anything, but it's been one of these really cloudy, dismal, gloom and doom day here, with the temperatures that barely got out of the 40s. I think I saw it got to 50 here briefly. And then you just go not too far to the north, through the Great Lakes and the Ohio Valley, and of course the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states, as the satellite shows. Nice and clear. This was a great day. And I mean, Joe, how strange is it? You see how the clouds are lined up from Kansas and Oklahoma and go east southeast. It's like this giant arm that go east southeast to off the southeast coast and off the Florida coast, and that's the block to the north, just forcing. There was a few people were trying to say that, well, maybe this is going to turn up the East Coast, and I kept making the argument last week. How are you going to do that with a block to your north? That blocking high is just never going to let it happen. And on top of that, you got that animal now that's sitting southeast of Nova Scotia. So there's no place for this thing to go except east or even southeast. This low could wind up eventually, when it crosses Florida and goes out on the other side, well, may wind up going south of Bermuda. And how often does that happen in the wintertime?
No, that's weird. That is weird. Because we have seen over the years, Joe and I, we've seen, like, let's say, clipper storms drop through Minnesota, past Chicago, go down as far south as sometimes the Delmarva, and then swing back to the north and east. But to see one do what this one has been doing, swinging all the way down into the deep south, and then, as you just said, Joe, turn back up and pass still to the south of Bermuda. That's weird. That is a really wacky type of scenario.
And out in the west, we might as well see if I can pull up a Pacific view here. Let's see. Um, North America. So I guess we want the Pacific Southwest. Do they have a wider shot? Let's see if this is wide enough. Let's go to this. All right, this is pretty good. But you could see the moisture here. Let's go to I'll put 36 frames on this, and you see the rotation that is off the coast. It's just outside of the view of this satellite, but all of this moisture is just getting drawn northward. And then, of course, as I said, you're going to start to see rain shift southward, because you can see there's a subtropical arm that is coming over, uh, the islands there in west of Los Angeles, and that stream just continues to flow right into California, right into the Sierra Nevadas, and then over on the other side into Nevada. So, very impressive system here that is out in the west. Radar, well, obviously, there's nothing to talk about from Maine to North Carolina. So let's go to the southeast, and we've got some severe thunderstorm warnings and even a couple of tornado. Looks like a tornado warning is just flashing now in northeastern Florida near Jacksonville. Oh no, that was a little earlier. I just updated the radar. So now those storms have lifted further to the north. But much of Georgia is raining up to about Atlanta. And then west across Alabama, there's some really strong cells here, some very heavy rain moving into across Alabama into Mississippi, probably along I-22. Mostly some scattered showers and storms in Florida at the moment. And then here's the radar out in the west. You got one big concentration of heavy rain from San Francisco north to the Oregon state line. There's a break in the middle, and then another area of heavy rains as you get down closer to Los Angeles. And now again starting to shift a little bit more to the south, not quite to San Diego yet, and that moisture moving northward into places like Palm Springs and up into the mountains there, uh, into Death Valley, or eventually into Death Valley, and also up into Nevada. That's snow. You can see some snow up in parts of Oregon and into southern Idaho. Storm Prediction Center has removed the risk areas that they had in Florida. They have some general thunderstorm risk, but the severe weather risk is gone. But they've added a marginal risk to the east of San Francisco in California, marginal risk of severe weather, and a really small area, excuse me, of 2% tornado risk there. And as we go to day two, we have a marginal risk in southernmost Florida tomorrow, and general thunderstorm risk again in California. And day three, this is Tuesday into Wednesday, still seeing some general thunderstorm risk in Southern California extending into Arizona, but nothing much else any in the rest of the country. And as far as precip goes, okay, uh, from Maine to North Carolina, it's either less than a tenth of an inch or just nothing for the next 7 days. We've got a front end loaded 3/4 of an inch to an inch and a half across the Gulf states into parts of southernmost South Carolina. A little bit of precip there for southern Florida. And then, of course, in the west, now remember, it's been raining there on and off for the last 4 days. So we're talking about an additional several to a stripe of 10-inch plus rainfalls being indicated by WPC to the northeast of Los Angeles. There's going to be some serious flooding in the foothills there and in the mountains on top of the snowfall. On top of that's along with as you go into the elevations above 4,000 and 5,000 feet and 6,000 feet when you start to see big snow amounts there.
Well, I mean, for this part of the country where we are, the tri-state New York area, you can see on the WPC map that only a slight amount of precip, liquid precip, over the next 7 days. Much of the time, it will be dry, and it is very unusual to see that in early February. February tends to be a very stormy, a very active month, and yet we've got this quiet, and it looks like, Joe, we're just about the only place in the nation that is experiencing this quiet weather. Also, parts of West Texas, and in contrast, look what's happening over in the far west, where they just continue to get hammered with all of that heavy rain from these. I keep saying Pacific disturbances. I'm an old school guy. I know that the new terminology is atmospheric river,
Oh, I refuse. I just refuse.
whatever you want to call
It's a major storm, Joe. It's a full occluded low. 987 millibars.
it. Right.
It's a major storm.
The Pineapple Express.
Yeah, if you can cliche it, they'll cliche it. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, it's, uh, never mind. We could go on all day with this. Okay, WPC for snow. It's all in the west. You can see this is the probability of at least two in the areas that we've already discussed. But let's, for fun, put up probability of 12, and 80 to 100% probability in the Sierra Nevadas. We could shoot for 24, and there are even some 70 to 80% probabilities for at least 24. And let's go 30. And there's 50 to 60% probabilities there in the Sierra Nevadas for at least 30 inches of snow. In other words, one season's worth of New York City snowfall, Joe, out of one storm.
Right. Right. And,
Yeah.
and, and, only once have we in New York City seen anything approaching that, and that was the Snowmageddon storm of 2016, where we had 27 and a half inches in one sitting. That's pretty close to the average of about 30 for an entire winter. But I might also point out that that was the only snow really that fell that whole winter. If we had not had that storm, probably would have had only a couple, 3 inches of snow for the entire winter season in 2015, 2016. So you see, it's ebb and flow. It runs. Well, I mean, you get these big storms that wallop you, and then you get periods when you don't have much. And it's quiet now. And maybe I might even go so far as to say, in this week coming up, it's quiet. It's actually too quiet. What looms later this month into March is something that is yet to be seen.
All right, well, I'm going to pull up a couple of teleconnections to do a little bit of long range here, because I'm sure everybody's kind of looking at every run of the GFS and the European and all the rest of it. There's some confusion. You go from run to run. Certain things happen in the longer term, and we know that the operational runs are pretty volatile, uh, and they continue to be volatile. But at the end, the teleconnections from last night's zero Z run have the NAO now dropping to the neutral line in a couple of days, and then just kind of straddling the neutral line right through the middle part of the month. So that's one development, and I think that's supported by what I'm seeing in terms of the operationals in the ensembles. The Arctic Oscillation, the AO, is put in a double top uh, during the last 10 days of January, and now is rapidly crashing down to the neutral line and going negative and going even more negative as we get past February 15th. So when the Arctic Oscillation is negative, that's usually a tell that cold air is being displaced southward from the polar region, further south into Canada and eventually into the United States. We don't know exactly where. Okay, we don't know exactly where this is going to be centered. So this is a very broad look. It's never a guarantee, because if you remember back in January for the middle week of January, when we had an off-the-wall negative Arctic oscillation and an off-the-wall negative NAO, and what happened? We had two major storms go to the Great Lakes. Please remember that when you look at these teleconnections, it's all fine and dandy, but um, they cover very, very broad areas of geography. They don't tell you where the troughs and ridges are going to set up. So you have to bear that in mind. And the PNA, the Pacific North America Index pattern, and this is an interesting development too, that the PNA is actually forecast to go positive. Uh, Right now, it's sitting just above the neutral line, goes back down to the neutral line in a couple of days, and then starts to rise and goes about one standard deviation positive. So PNA has not been very cooperative much of December. It's been near the neutral line, and then briefly went positive around and after Christmas, then went negative, which is not, that's more for ridging in the east and troughing in the west. Well, now it's kind of going toward that neutral line, but then going back positive for the middle of the month to pair off with the the AO and the NAO. So you have that happening. Uh, the One of the things I've noticed about the 18Z run is that whatever the primary runs are doing in the longer range, the 18Z run often likes to do the opposite. And that's kind of what it did today, this afternoon, where here's your omega block. This is this was Saturday's upper air. There you go. So now we're into early Monday morning. So I mean, this is really impressive for this time of year. Here's your upper high is here. You've got an upper low. You've got an upper low. You've got this upper low, which the models didn't handle all that well. So the jet stream suppressed way to the south, the block in a not in a favorable spot for cold and snow, because if you notice, the Arctic is still pretty much cut off in this, but that is forecast to break down. So we're undergoing another pattern shift here toward the end of the week. Block goes away, and then eventually, the 18Z run tries to bring troughing into the east next week, only to then suddenly out of nowhere decides that, okay, let's put a trough in the west. But it also develops a very strong blocking high over Greenland, which is interesting for next weekend. This is the weekend, I'm sorry, not next weekend, but the weekend after that. So this is Valentine's Day and going beyond. And you can see that big purple area up near Greenland, but it's got this trough in the west. And I kind of saw that and I said, okay, it's 18Z. Let's do exactly the opposite of what 12Z does. And when you look at the ensembles have, are not there. The ensembles are completely the opposite of that operational run. So that kind of tells me that we could probably toss it. Uh, beyond 7 days. But here you have the ensembles pretty insistent, creating a fairly impressive looking troughing in the eastern part of the United States uh, after about the 13th, 14th, ridging up the west coast um, and blocking over Greenland. So you've got your pieces here, folks, for you winter weather. Those of you who are rooting for some winter weather before the season's over with. You've got the ensembles going in your direction. Both the GFS and the European actually match up very well as far as the longer term is concerned. And I didn't look at the Canadian today, so let's look at it now. Yeah, even the Canadian ensembles are all pretty much the same. So I wouldn't, I would step away from the 18Z run, operational run, and let the ensembles rule the day. As far as where we're going. But I remain guarded because you don't know. Okay, you're going to have a trough in the east, but where in the east? Is it at 70? Is it at 80 west? Is it at 90 west? I mean, that all qualifies for troughs in the east. So we don't know that yet, and I don't think we're going to know.
I
And
mean,
how about
you could have a scenario. You're absolutely right. I mean, you could have a scenario where it's at 90 west, and as you mentioned, Joe, everything goes up toward the Great Lakes. We're on the warm side, and we just get nothing but rain. But then look at what's happening right now. I mean, we enjoyed a brilliant, sunny, dry day with no weather problems to speak of, and yet, if you go about 300 miles or 500 kilometers to the north and east of New York City, they're in the throes of a major snowstorm because the trough was a little bit too far to the east. And so it generated a significant storm, but it generated it a little bit too far away from us for us to see much of it. So we don't know where that next round of upper troughs are going to line up, the longitudinal waves or troughs. So we'll just have to wait and see. But I will say one other thing. I remember distinctly last year at this time, Joe, early February, that we were all just sitting here and saying, "Oh my God, it's so boring." There's not, and we were looking like way ahead, and we saw nothing. There was nothing to be optimistic about. There was nothing that we could say, yes, there is the possibility of a change toward colder or snowier or stormier or more interesting weather. This year, at least, we can say that there is that potential at mid month and beyond that we might be seeing something of interest. Unlike last year, when again, it was like more or less a dead winter for the entire winter. At least
agreed?
things are changing a little bit, and it looks a little bit more optimistic in that regard. Whether or not we get it ultimately, well, we'll just have to wait and see. Maybe we'll get an idea from. We'll ask Lee Goldberg maybe on Wednesday what he thinks
Oh, of
of the.
course. Well, once we have him trapped here, we can ask him anything we want.
Yes.
Anyhow, I hope I didn't frighten you, Lee, because I know he's lurking. He has to be lurking somewhere. But here we go. There's our low. When I see things like this, when I see a low that basically tracks southeast from Oklahoma to the to the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, why not just send a hurricane hunter plane? It's so far south, but
Yeah.
out it goes. And the California storm, which is forecasted by the GFS, was forecasted at 7 o'clock tonight to be down to a 979. So I'll be curious to see what the analysis map shows when it comes out in an hour or so. That comes inland. The energy, gradually shifts east of the Rockies, and of course, with this block dissolving, that low is going to wind up going up toward the Dakotas. So it looks like there might be some snows for Montana and North Dakota out of this, and then how, when you see rain in Minnesota and Wisconsin in February, you know that things are not set up right. But that's going to be part of the process here. We're dry. Once that offshore low gets out of the way, it lets the high get out of the way, and we start to get to a warmer flow toward the end of the week. Maybe a shower with a front. The GFS not particularly bullish with that. Now, there's something that comes out of Texas and into the Mid Atlantic comes Sunday into Monday that goes out on the GFS. It's weak, and then there's another low that follows that off the southeast coast with some colder air starting to spread out through the Great Lakes early next week, and then that goes out to the east. So the 12Z GFS had a fairly colder look to it, although at the end of the period it wanted to go back to the old trough in the west routine. The European today was kind of interesting. I'm just gonna, and also last night, it wants to make more, and I just want to see what the upper air, why it did this. Um, but the European last night, uh, so this is on Friday, so there's a little short wave where the cold front goes by. It has more energy. There's some kind of energy there from Washington and Oregon that drops southwestward into New Mexico, and it carries it along to the northeast up into western New York, and then a more troughing that follows behind it. So it has a much more definable upper air feature coming out early next week. So it wanted to make some kind of primary low that runs up a fairly wrapped up primary. This is for next Sunday night that runs up into Ohio, and you got this, once again, be very cautious because we've seen this the last couple of weeks. Here's another example of the model wanting to build a big cold high in eastern Canada. And we've seen the models do that, and it's been all BS. So let's maybe assume the same because it's trying to do this again with a cold high up in Quebec, a primary that goes to Ohio, and then redevelops fairly quickly off the New Jersey coast and passes south of Nantucket. And I know that it brought in colder air and it had like sort of a rain to snow type situation with accumulating snows for southern New England down through even southern New Jersey down to southeastern Pennsylvania. I you know I've become really really not a fan of the European over the last for a while now, and even more so in the last couple of months because it's really been doing some squirrely things. I'm not saying that this is necessarily wrong, but it would seem to me that it's probably not the most likely outcome for early next week.
But didn't you say that they were going to phase out the operational?
Yes, they are
Yeah.
next month.
Yeah. So this may be one of the reasons why the problems with the operational.
Well, they
Not
took all the computing power from the operational in order to run more ensembles,
right.
or
Right.
as I obviously like to say, and shambles.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Phone King One on the chat board. He says, "Why don't you ask Lee Goldberg on Wednesday why ABC parted ways with Amy Freeze? She was the only reason I watched Channel 7 on slow weather days." Well, first of all, Amy Freeze was a weekend and fill in weather anchor at Channel 7. You don't have to wait until Wednesday to ask Lee Goldberg this question. She was a weekend and fill in, and now she is more or less full time on Fox Weather. So if you have Fox Weather on your cable system, you could watch Amy Freeze to your heart's content because she now has a full time position there, which is something she did not have at ABC 7. And if she's full time at Fox Weather, who knows? She may be making more money. And so if they
Well,
offered,
how do you know? How do you know that ABC let her go anyway? I mean, she could have left on her own.
she might have left on her own, or maybe her contract was coming up and she saw the opportunity at Fox Weather. I don't know all the details, but I do know that she is full time at Fox Weather as opposed to just being a fill in or a weekend person at. And also the other thing that may play a role, Joe, is that she was on weekends in the mornings, which meant that she had, as you and I both know, that wonderful shift of you having to get up at 2 or 3 in the morning and then getting into work and fluffing yourself up to be ready for a bright and cheery start to the day at 5 or 6 a.m. I'm seeing her from time to time in the afternoons and evenings, which is a heck of a lot better to be as opposed to being in the wee hours of the morning. So that may have been another reason that she made the shift over to another network. So anyway,
All right, time to do a little Briller Jeopardy,
and
shall
I do
we?
I have it right or
I have one too.
oh well, you want to use yours first?
Um, okay, we could
All
do
right,
that.
okay.
Yeah. So thank you, Scott, for sending this. You know, you have your hands full, so I appreciate that, especially taking care of your mom, who comes first. Uh, but thank you for sending this. Anyway, this is New York City extreme. Okay. So I think most of you will probably get a lot of these. The lowest temperature ever in the month of February in New York City Central Park. And
Uh,
and and bonus points if you know the date.
do you want me to participate in this or?
Well, I know you know it.
Yeah.
-5 for Craig Kahlberg. No. Um, Joe Z says -15. And Daniel Fitzsimmons says -15. And John Melander says -15. So then you know what that means, Joe.
It means it must be -15.
And it is -15. And you can tell us what the date was.
February the 9th, 1934.
In the dirty 30s. As
The dirty 30.
Tex Antoine used to call them the dirty 30s.
The dirty 30.
Um, Now, the highest temperature recorded in the month of February actually has some meaning for both Joe and I.
Oh, was that the day before the blizzard?
Yes, it was.
So yeah,
The
yeah.
highest temperature. Craig Karlberg says 79. Mike
Uh,
Waterhouse says 82. New York City, Mike, not Newark. John Melander says 78. Frank R. 77. Daniel Fitzsimmons, Joe Z. Patrick Darcy. L at 78. This is Jason Fox, Izzy D. And Adam Lowe. And the answer is 78. I think Newark got to 80 that day. February 21st, 2018, which was followed by the greatest snowfall ever the greatest snowfall ever after a temperature that high in New York City. Okay, 78 and 9.9 inches of snow at the park. Now, everybody else got a foot plus, but no, Central Park got 9.9.
by the way, can you give me
You have
sharing
it.
capabilities? I have sharing capabilities.
Hmm.
All right, so I'm going to share a screen here, which may a lot of people may find it is not this is not the event we just spoke of, but the one we just spoke of a few seconds ago about the coldest day. Um, and this is from the New York Times. Mercury 14.3 degrees below zero on New York's coldest day. But I should point something out here. The 14.3 below zero was not at Central Park. That was at the
At the at
national.
that right, I'm
That was at
sorry.
the U.S. That was at the U.S. Weather Bureau, not National Weather Service. But back then, it was U.S. Weather Bureau. They were stationed on White
Whitehall.
Street or whatever. So
Whitehall.
yeah, and that's where the thermometer was. But Central Park did record at Belvedere Castle -15 degrees. But you can see, and this is really absurd. I mean, you see, yesterday they were talking about the temperatures. 7:25 a.m. This is at Whitehall, 14.3 degrees below zero, and it did not go above zero until noon that day when it got to 2 degrees above zero, and then it just kept going up. 3 degrees at 1 p.m., 4 at 2 p.m., 5 at 3 p.m., 7 at 4 p.m., and it stayed that way. Did it reach? No, that was the high. That was seven
Right.
degrees.
And
So
48 hours later, it was 40 and raining.
yeah. So
Okay.
and you could see that all the people who were not, you know, prepared for something like this. 6 dead, hundreds treated for frostbitten ears and noses. 8 to 10 below due here today. Oh God, we've not seen anything like that, at least in our lifetime, have we, Joe?
No, no. Um, Although last year, right around this time, we were coming off the brutal blast of temperatures. It got to -4 at Bridgeport, set a record
Right,
there. I think New
right,
York City got to 0.
right.
Just missed going below 0. Okay, so the coldest daytime maximum temperature, coldest daytime high.
The coldest daytime high.
Coldest daytime high.
I would have to
Oh,
say that probably goes back into the 1800s, late 1800s, and I'm going to say something ridiculous like three.
Oh, Snake Country, Joe. Adam Lowe's at Snake Country too at 5.
So we
So,
got
who's got a 4? Do I have a 4? Do I see a 4 anywhere? I'm giving you the answer, folks. William Uber, thank you. Patrick Darcy, thank you. 4. And it was actually in 1918.
yeah, that was a cold winter.
That was a brutal 17, 18. And the greatest snowfall for the month of February, the whole month. The greatest snowfall for the whole month of February and the
Didn't
year.
we just had that like maybe what 10, 15 years ago or whatever
Yes.
recently?
Hmm.
Something ridiculous like 36 inches.
Snake Country.
Okay,
Snake Country. Dizzy D says 35. Alan Rupa says 36. 36 to Joe Z. 38 for Patrick Darcy. Jason Fox, Christinapedia at 37. 36.9, so rounded off 37. And it was in 2010.
right,
2010. And
right.
what was the biggest snowstorm for the month of February? The biggest snowstorm ever in the month of February.
Yeah, and 30 yeyears ago, whatever we would do, we automatically would have said the blizzard of '78. But I know that we had some crazy amounts. That it may have been in that same winter of 2010, something like what, 19 inches or 21 inches? 21 inches, I'll say.
Um, no, higher. Just seeing Maggie P, Alan Rupa, Vincent Croce, Snake Country at 28, James Davidson to 25, Rich Rothmansky 26, Snake Country for you. So Patrick Darcy at 27, 26.9, and that was on February 11th, February 12th, 2006. That
Wow.
was a particularly interesting winter because it wasn't that cold that winter. That was actually a warmer than normal winter. And we had a lot of it was unusual because we had a lot of the snow systems that winter were rain changing to snow cases, and not just rain changing over to snow before ending, but rain changing to accumulating snow, where a number of storms that we had produced several to even 6, 7 inches after it started off as rain. I don't know if the February 11th and 12th one probably also did start as rain and then turned to heavy snow. I'd have to go back and look at that one, but there was a lot of these storms that year, and it was I thought it was one of the fun years forecasting because I always, for me, um, as depressing as snow mixing with sleet and then changing to rain is, uh, it's it's the other way around. It's far more exciting when it starts as rain and then changes over to heavy snow and accumulates, because that's fun to watch.
Right. I mean, we just had the anniversary on Groundhog Day of the flash freeze that occurred 45 at 5 a.m. and by 7 a.m. it was 10 degrees in New York City, and we saw a quick change over from rain over to ice and then snow. Newark had 2.4 inches in 1 hour of snow. Again, it went from 45 to 10, and I rarely have seen it snow as hard, and the visibility was cut down literally to zero. I was living in Throgs Neck at the time, and man, I was actually able to see, Joe. I had one of those thermometers in my room. It was not the kind the digital. It was an actual,
Yeah,
thermometer where you can actually see
you
the
watch the
liquid.
mercury go down. You and I was doing
Yeah,
the same thing. You just watched the mercury go down.
I'm exactly.
55, 45, 35, 23, 16, 10, 9. I think those were the observations at
And I
Central Park.
remember, and I remember, uh, I was listening to the John Gambling show on WOR radio at the time. It was like 7:30 in the morning. Here the wind is blowing, the snow is falling, and John Gambling is reading off snow delays or school closings, and he says some school, I think it was in Long Island, some school for handicapped children. He said there will not be any school bus service for handicapped children. And my sister, who hears this, stuck her head through the door of my bedroom, and she says, "No, they're going to have to walk today."
Oh God.
These are little things that stand in your memory after 48 years.
Yeah, no, I hear you. All right, the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast brought to you by Tempest by Weatherflow. Get the revolutionary Tempest weather system. Join the fastest growing observing weather network on the planet. Link is on the description to this podcast. Use the coupon code WINTER2324 because if you do, you will get,
10% off.
and it's fun to have a weather station that you can monitor on your mobile device, by the way,
Yes.
which I can.
So
All
you and
right.
I will be back together tomorrow night at 7:35 for that always special day of the year for the two of us. National Weather Person's Day
Oh,
tomorrow.
that's right. Yes, tomorrow's National Weather Person's Day.
Yes.
Yes.
So take your favorite weather person out to lunch tomorrow.
Exactly, and make them pay.
Make them pay. And thank you. Speaking of, thank you to Scott Briller and to Keith James II for hitting super chats tonight. And
Thank you.
100 likes.
Thank you. And we will see everybody tomorrow night. Nighty night.
Nighty night, folks. Yeah.